Hey everyone, I know that you're all excited about 6.0 and taking a look at the new features. So in this presentation, we're going to do just that. My name is Arturs Lontons. I'm a technical marketing engineer at Zabbix. And today, let's take a look at what's new in Zabbix 6.0 LTS. So, Zabbix 6.0 focuses on a couple of things. So of course, we've been kind of focusing on enterprise level features, and 6.0 is a large proof of that. We are talking about solving performance issues and improving performance in general. We are talking about providing additional value to different kinds of teams. We're talking about management, DevOps, IT ops, process owners. This is something that 6.0 focuses heavily on. Of course, security is always one of our core focuses. Always was, always will be as we move on and develop our product. So there have been some improvements related to that. Additional monitoring capabilities. Of course, there are always new technologies, new things, something that we need to add, something that some new things that we want to monitor. We continue doing that. We will continue doing that in the future, and 6.0 is no exception. And ever since we delivered out-of-the-box integrations via webhooks and also started an extensive development of new templates, this is something that we've been doing, and 6.0 brings many new templates, integrations, and a bunch of other improvements. So let's start counting down these major new features. And of course, speaking of enterprise, speaking of added security, first off, we have native Zabbix server high availability cluster. So now Zabbix admins will have the ability to create Zabbix server clusters. We're talking about the server, the Zabbix component called Zabbix server here. And we can define one or multiple redundant nodes. All of these nodes will connect to the same database. So they will talk to the same database, be it MySQL, Postgres, Oracle. And under the hood, we will have a new table called server nodes that will list all of the HA nodes, their statuses. Is it active? Is it disabled? Is it in the standby mode right now? And we can also define failover period. So after how much of a time span should we kind of switch to a different node if the current node fails? In the server config file, so if you're updating from an older version to 6.0, you will need to add a new parameter in the config file, which is your HA node name. It's an arbitrary name that you give your HA node, for example, node 1, node 2, node 3, and so on. You need to add it, and if you've added it, Zabbix will assume that you're running in HA mode. So all of your nodes will need to have this parameter. And remember, if you're not installing Zabbix from scratch, if you're upgrading from 5.0 to 6.0 or 5.4 to 6.0, this will have to be added manually, right? We don't necessarily overwrite your config files, because why should we do that and risk breaking your config? So you'll have to add this new parameter manually, and you can always find an example of the current config file with all of the new parameters in our documentation. So once we've added it, we restart our servers. We're running in HA, and standby nodes will monitor the last access time of the currently active node, and if the last access time is greater than failover delay, if we have exceeded the failover delay, the cluster will fail over to one of the standby nodes. And of course, this failover operation will be logged in the server log and also audited. For our proxies, how will our proxies behave when we have 5 nodes running, right? How will they know which node to connect? They will actually attempt to connect to all of the nodes listed in the server parameters. So now server parameter supports multiple addresses on the proxy, separated by a semicolon, as you can see in the example. So proxy will attempt connecting to each of these nodes. Once it succeeds, it will stick with the currently active node. We'll have a bunch of command line options. We will, by the way, have a separate speech about HA, so I won't delve too much into it. We have a separate speech. But we will have new command line options related to HA. We will have API methods related to HA that will allow you to obtain the status of Zabbix HA. Updated internal templates, which will use LLD to obtain your HA nodes and monitor their status. Auditing to audit log, and front end will automatically switch to the currently active Zabbix server node. So it will know which node it should communicate with. It will grab this information from the database. Here we have a schema, quite a complex one. We have a couple of proxies on the right side, top right. We have a couple of front ends, top left. At the bottom right, we have our server cluster. In the middle of it, we have our Zabbix server database. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at the proxies, top right. You can see that they are simply connecting to the server cluster, and they're just trying to figure out, sort of by a brute force-ish approach, which node is active one, and then they will stick and communicate with one of those. With the front end, it's a bit different. They will take a look at the currently active node. The front end will take a look at the currently active node in the database, grab this information, ingest it, and then connect to the currently active node in the server HA cluster. And the servers themselves, they will talk to the Zabbix server database to figure out which node currently is active. Is it up? Has failover delay been reached? And if everything is okay, then the currently active node will continue, the usual Zabbix type of queries, selecting data, inserting data, deleting data, and so on the database. So a single database over here. In the front end, you'll be able to see in the system information widget the status of your HA. We've kind of expanded the system information widget, so the HA status will be displayed there. Next up, so from something very technical, HA, to maybe moving to a different type of user, giving value to a different type of user. We're talking about business service monitoring here. So we've had this old services section that has been with us for a while, and we decided to reinvent it pretty much. And focus on business service monitoring and create a set of new rules and new features and make it a lot more scalable and a lot more flexible. And you can use these services, you can define services for things such as server clusters, systems which consist of a complex IT stack where each component is a part of a service. Systems with redundant components in place, something that depends on many load balancers or something, or many HA components. And we have tested it, and it scales up to more than 100,000 services. So extremely scalable. So here's an example. We have a web service that depends on network component tagged with network, web server component tagged with web server, application server component tagged with app, and a database component, which is a separate service, separate child service most probably, which depends on 2 nodes. So it's probably a database with application running on it, tagged with database. Now this is familiar to those of you who know services previously. This is somewhat familiar. Okay, now we're using tags. It's a bit different, but it's familiar. But the beauty of this comes a bit later because we will have a new flexible set of service status calculation. So first off, we have these 3 statuses, these 3 simple calculation rules, which are familiar to you, most likely. The parent service will have the severity of the most critical of child services. If at least one of them has a problem, most critical child services, if all of them have problems, or it will constantly be in a OK state. But we can now extend this, and this is where the beauty comes in, and this is extremely great, extremely flexible. We can create additional rules. As you can see, we can do calculations based on weights. We can assign weights to each of our services. We can set service status change service status to a problem state if a specific percentage of child services is in a problem state, or a specific number, or a specific weight is reached. A specific weight of child services that are in a problem state has reached, let's say, an arbitrary number, 5 or 10. That's our weight. And if the current weight of the child services in the problem state is more than 10, for example, the parent service is also in problem state. And then we can decide on custom severities, right? Which severity should this parent service take if it's in a problem state? So we can also define custom severities here. Well, once again, we'll have a separate speech about this. I won't spoil too much, just go through the general gist of this. So yeah, this is something that's new and really flexible. And there are many other features, such as ability to define permissions for your services, so you can kind of isolate. Different users can have access to different parts of the service tree. We will be able to display our SLAs on widgets, root cause analysis. If your service changes status to a problem, display the root cause of it and maybe send an alert. Yes, we can now react on these service state changes. Send an alert and receive information about the root cause which caused our service to go down. Was it the database? Was it the application server? The network? You'll receive information about it. And yes, this way with isolation, with service permissions, we can define business services for multi-tenant environments. Each tenant will have access to their own part of the service tree, to their own specific set of services. Next up, it's again something completely different, a treat for your Zabbix admins. I know you've been wanting for a reworked and improved audit log. We have improved this. Another thing that we have reinvented, redesigned, is the audit log. So it's a whole new database structure for audit log that uses collision-resistant IDs, CUIDs, to generate audit log IDs by preventing also row locks. So this allows us to have many audit log entries. Essentially, the plan is to have everything logged, both from the front end and from the server side, with minimal performance impact and without, of course, locking anything down while these records are being inserted. They'll be added in bulk on the SQL side. Each set of actions or operations, call them whatever you want, will have its own record set ID. So for example, if a single API call or a single low-level discovery rule creates multiple hosts, it'll be under the same record set ID, and you can then filter and see what things did particular operation change. This is a quick look at it. So here we can see a bunch of things being added, new switch, let's see, update to a user being done over here, where we change their name, their password, a bunch of failed logins. So once again, all of this can be filtered by, we can see record set IDs here. We can take a look at a specific record set ID, filter by that, and see what has been changed. And once again, the idea here is to enable detailed logging for both front end and server, which is something completely new. Once again, this will be accessible via API, so we can retrieve these audit log records via API. And this is an ongoing effort. We will kind of have the basis for this in 6.0, but we plan to expand on this and add more types of operations that get logged in 6.2, and as we add new things then onward. It's an ongoing effort that will constantly get updated and improved upon. Machine learning. It's again something that we'll have a separate presentation for. So I'll just generally talk about this. The presentation about machine learning will really go in depth into the logic that comes in this. But this is something, once again, that's been long awaited. So baseline monitoring, for those of you who cannot necessarily define strict triggers, we have new baseline trigger function, trend baseline. And for anomaly detection, trend anomaly STL allows us to catch and detect anomalies. And we can tweak these quite a bit. For example, for anomaly detection, we can specify seasonality, detection period, and many other parameters. Next up, visualization. Of course, just as every LTS version, this one also comes with a set of new things for visualization, something that you've been probably waiting for a while now. Once again, with a focus on added value from your metrics, we will have the data table widget. And data table widget allows you to have a summary view for your metrics. Essentially, it will permit you, for example, to define top end and bottom end views for different metrics. Top 10 CPU loads or CPU load metrics in your environment, which shows they belong to what they are, or bottom 10. Simple thing such as a single item widget will also be implemented. So yeah, before that, you kind of lack the ability to display just a single metric in your dashboard. Simple, but useful, and now you will have it. Vector graphs, you've probably heard that we plan to fully migrate to these vector graphs. It's been an ongoing effort, and at some point it will happen, full migration. And we're continuing working on this. It's a continuous work, and we've kept improving on vector graphs, and they will have now the ability to reference individual items and a bunch of other visualization and sort of UX changes. And as I mentioned for services, the SLA report widget, which will display the current SLA filtered by service tags. Geomaps. Wow, right? This is another great visualization feature, something that we've seen many users implement with the old maps, but it required custom scripting, custom API calls, things like that. Was somewhat complex, let's say. Now it's native. You plug in a map in a widget on your dashboard, you select your map provider, select which host groups to display, which hosts from which host groups to display, filtered by tags, and you can zoom in and zoom out, and you can filter by severities and things like that. You'll be able to see your hosts located geographically. The coordinates will be provided in the inventory fields for this. Multiple providers for your geomaps, and coordinates for the entity will be provided in inventory coordinates fields. Next up, agent. Once again, something that will have a separate speech on. A bunch of new improvements for both C agent and Go agent, so agent and agent 2. We will be able to obtain additional file information, such as the file owner and current file permissions. We will finally now be able in 6.0 to collect host metadata as a metric, something that we've seen quite a few people request. Count matching TCP and UDP sockets. And one great improvement is the ability to monitor the SSL and TLS certificates with agent 2. You can check if they're valid, what their expiration date is, and so on. And one more great improvement is, so we've kind of talked about agent 2 as this great modular thing that is based on plugins, but the big issue before was you had to recompile them if you wanted to include some new external plugins that you maybe yourself have developed. Now you'll be simply able to point the agent at those plugins, restart it, and it will pick them up. That's great. That makes the agent 2 so much more flexible, and the use case for it so much more transparent. You can now easily understand what the benefit is. It's so simple to just write a new plugin and go and have Zabbix pick it up. No need to recompile anything. It's really amazing. Security. Custom Zabbix password complexity requirements. So something that's maybe common sense once again, but we've lacked for a bit and we finally introduced is, as you can see in the screenshot, the ability to implement the minimum password length requirements, password character requirements, and avoid dictionary attacks by specifying that, yes, my passwords should not contain some easy to guess words or phrases or something like that. So, you know, you can define all of this depending on your company policies, define password complexity requirements, and your users will have to abide by those. So securing Zabbix environment in a very simple way, doesn't require technical knowledge, just applying your company policies to this. UI UX improvements, so a couple of those, of course. So one really requested feature was creating hosts directly from monitoring hosts, so reducing the amount of sections that you have to navigate through, click around, and so on. Now you'll be able to create hosts directly from monitoring hosts, so from the monitoring section. Extremely useful, less clicking, more user-friendly. We have also removed monitoring overview section. It was underutilized. It maybe looked a bit archaic at this point. And now you'll be able to use this only via a dashboard widget, this overview. Another great improvement when creating items is you'll see that Zabbix will now be able to automatically pick up the default type of information for your items. And this is great. You don't need to look up documentation anymore. You just create an item and boom, there you can see what type of data, type of information should be used for it. It's amazing. And also, for consistency's sake, we have changed the simple macros in map labels so they abide by the existing trigger function syntax and use expression macros. So instead of simple macros, we will now use expression macros in map labels for consistency's sake. New templates and integrations. Just as I mentioned initially, a bunch of new templates and integrations for the most popular vendors out there based on your votes and requests, such as F5, Cisco, Cloudflare, InfluxDB, and also a new webhook integration for GitHub. So now you'll be able to forward your events to GitHub and generate issues based on these events. So extremely useful for GitHub fans or for all of those that have these templates. And also don't forget that if you're sitting on 5.0 and you'll switch to 6.0, you will get all of the templates also added in 5.2 and 5.4. You'll be able to use them, right? Just go to our Git page, take a look at the list of templates, import them after the upgrade, then you can use them. So this is just a part that got added in 6.0 LTS. In between 5.0 and 6.0, there's also much, much more. And some other general changes and improvements. So we have new mono dec and mono inc function, which allows you to detect continuous increase or decrease of values. Support for UTF-8 MB4 character set and collation for MySQL. A bunch of new HTTP methods for webhooks. Those of you who are maybe developing your own webhooks, this will be useful for you. Timeout settings for command line tools. A niche case, most of the time you won't need this, but a case nonetheless. You can define timeouts for your command line tools. And of course, performance improvements for each and every component, especially if you're migrating from 5.0 to 6.0, you'll get not only these 6.0 benefits, but also the 5.2 and 5.4 benefits. So definitely consider switching to 6.0. There are some great improvements that await you for each of these components. And that's sort of the general overview. There's been a lot of things that we talked about, from visualization to HA to integrations to services, and I can't even remember all of it. That was quite a lot. So definitely check out the other presentations which focus on specific topics, such as migrating to 6.0, how to do that, and presentations discussing individual topics if you wish to dive deeper. But wow, I'm really excited. That's an extremely large set of features that we've been waiting for very long, and I can't wait for you guys to take a look at it, to kind of have a hands-on experience with it, and can't wait to hear your feedback about these new features. So thank you guys, and I'll see you down the line when we get to talk about 6.0 and get our hands on it. The alpha is out already, so play around with it and give us your opinions. Thank you guys. And now it's time for some questions. We have received a few about the new features, so let me answer them. So first off, how will you be able to configure geomaps? Will they be similar to the regular maps? So actually, geomaps right now are available in the latest alpha release, so you can kind of have a hands-on experience with those. How to configure them? So you'll have to select the map provider or actually define a custom one, and then you can simply filter on the map which host you want to see based on the inventory coordinates, and then you'll see them on your geomap. There are a couple of settings for the widget that you can configure, but it's really simple. It's nothing like the regular maps. It's a lot more simple, a lot more streamlined. Next up, any specific performance improvements that I can mention. So between 5.0 and 6.0, there have been quite a few. Specifically, for example, when proxies communicate with the server, there has been some overhead removed, some networking and performance improvements because of that. Of course, between 5.0 and 6.0, there have been server improvements, just generally when working with data, history syncing, and so on. Specifically for 6.0, for example, if you're moving from 5.4 to 6.0, there have been improvements with template linkages. So template linkage process is now a lot faster. That's quite important on large instances. And more to come down the line. So 6.0 specific, what I can say right now is template linking in the front end. And when we're talking 5.0 to 6.0, server, proxy, front end, everything has gained some improvements. Next up, can you still change the type of information manually? Since yes, we'll have the automated type of information selector right now. Another feature that's available in the latest alpha release. So you can play around with it. And yes, you can change it manually. And of course it makes sense because you have pre-processing in place. Maybe you're changing your data from text data to numeric data. So yeah, you can change it manually. But by default, it will now have the kind of predefined data type of information that fits the default value that you would receive without any pre-processing. But to answer the question briefly, yes, the type of information can still be changed manually. So, and those will be all the questions that I have received so far. Feel free to use the chat for other questions. Thank you a lot, guys. And download the alpha, play around with the latest version to see what's new firsthand. Thank you.